This is Jerusalem. To many, it's the holiest city on earth, being at the center of all Abrahamic religions. There's the Western Wall for Judaism, the Al-Aqsa compound for Islam, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for Christianity, just to name a few examples. But for a city so sacred, Jerusalem is also one of the most divided places in the world. And no, not just politically. Take a look at this map of the Old City, where all the religious sites are located. There is a Christian quarter, Jewish quarter, Muslim quarter, and even an Armenian quarter. So how did this one small walled district, less than half a square mile in size, become the spiritual capital of three religions, and so divided at the same time? Well, to understand that, we have to go back thousands of years, of course, to the moment Jerusalem first became holy. About 3,000 years ago, or around 1000 BCE, is when this story really gets started. At the time, the city was home to the Jebusites, a Canaanite tribe, but soon it was conquered by King David and his forces from the tribe of Judah. The reason for this was a few things. The first was its strategic desirability. Three prominent hills surrounded the city: Mount Moriah, known today as the Temple Mount, the Mount of Olives, and Mount Zion. And these mountains connected to several deep rocky valleys: the Kidron Valley, the Tyropoeon Valley, and the Hinnom Valley. Together, these hills and valleys gave Jerusalem an amazing natural defense system, making it a safe place to rule from. The second was the water. Though Jerusalem is located in an extremely barren region, at the base of the Kidron Valley was the largest freshwater spring in the mountains, the Gihon Springs, which provided a continual supply of water for its residents. And lastly, politically, Jerusalem was centrally located and politically neutral, not belonging to any of the 12 tribes of Israel. So when King David captured Jerusalem, he made it the capital of the United Kingdom of Israel, a loose confederation of the 12 tribes. At least that's how the story goes. Now, I'm saying this because it's important to quickly note here that in a video like this, some people will say certain events never happened, that this or that is just the biblical narrative and not an actual academic one. And that's okay. But to understand Jerusalem's significance, then we have to look at it from its religious history, because that's what ultimately shaped it, whether there's a mountain of historical evidence for it or not. Anyways, now that that's out of the way, during King David's roughly 33-year reign over the Kingdom of Israel, there was one major thing he did that contributed to making Jerusalem holy: bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. The Ark of the Covenant was the most revered object in Judaism, described in the Hebrew Bible as a gold-plated wooden chest containing the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod, and a pot of manna, while also symbolizing God's presence. It's extremely sacred, to say the least, and bringing it to Jerusalem from the town of Kiryat Jearim helped establish it as the holy city and united the nation under its new spiritual and political center. The next major event came with David's son and successor, King Solomon, who reigned from approximately 970 to 931 BCE. He was the one who built the first temple, also known as Solomon's Temple. Technically, it was David who'd wanted to build the temple, but God had forbidden him from doing so for being too much of a man of war. So it was bestowed to Solomon. Nevertheless, David still provided all the resources, detailed construction plans, and funding for it. Constructed on the Temple Mount, the site where Abraham was said to have prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac, the first temple became the permanent home of the Ark of the Covenant and the centerpiece of Israelite worship. Every major festival, such as Passover and Sukkot, required Israelites to travel to Jerusalem and offer sacrifices at the temple. It was the crowning achievement of Solomon's reign and solidified Jerusalem as the most sacred city on earth. Now, if we're to time jump quite a bit, the first temple was eventually destroyed in the Siege of Jerusalem in 587 BCE by the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and much of the population was sent into exile in Babylon. But after 70 years, many of the Israelites were allowed to return and rebuild the temple after Cyrus the Great, founding king of the Achaemenid Empire, proclaimed the Edict of Cyrus in 516 BCE. 500 years later, in 20 BCE, King Herod the Great, a Roman Jewish client king, renovated it, rebuilding it much larger and artificially expanding the platform on which it stood by almost double. As you can tell by the dates, we're now getting into the timeline of what makes Jerusalem holy to Christianity. Not to say that everything I just said before isn't, because after all, both religions do believe in the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament in Christianity terms, besides for a few differences. It was shortly after this that Jesus' life on earth began, which overlapped with the existence of the Second Temple. In fact, he spent significant amounts of time there, from preaching to even cleansing it of merchants. Nearly all of the most significant events of Jesus' life were in Jerusalem. The Last Supper and First Pentecost took place in the cenacle of Mount Zion. He was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, at the foot of the Mount of Olives. He was crucified at a site called Golgotha, immediately outside Roman Jerusalem's walls. And while the location of his resurrection and ascension has been the subject of debate, what's for sure is that it was in Jerusalem. Same with where he's said to have been buried. Eventually though, the Second Temple met the same fate as the first one, being destroyed in the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE by the Roman Empire, when they finally burned the city down due to revolts. The reason all this is relevant is because today, the famous Western Wall, the holiest accessible site where those of the Jewish faith can pray, is actually the last remaining remnant of the Second Temple's expanded platform, if that makes sense. After Jerusalem was burned down, a new Roman colony was built on top of it, Aelia Capitolina. This marked a significant transformation of the city from a Jewish metropolis to a small pagan settlement dedicated to Roman paganism. The city was laid out on a classical Roman grid, a signature of Roman urban planning. It was these two lines specifically that created the modern divisions of Jerusalem: the Cardo Maximus from north to south, and Decumanus Maximus from east to west. This grid established the basic geometry of Jerusalem that all its later cities, Byzantine, Islamic, and Crusader, were built on. A few centuries later, Constantine the Great became the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity in 312 AD, and with it, slowly the Roman Empire became Christian too. Aelia Capitolina turned back into Jerusalem, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built in 326 CE. It's generally considered the holiest site in Christianity, built atop both Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, and the tomb of Jesus, where he's said to have been buried. As a result, Christians gradually began settling around the northwest corner of the city to be near the places of Christ's life, clustering near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and informally establishing what became the Christian Quarter. Its position on the complete opposite side of the Temple Mount also created a natural separation of sacred space, the old Jewish center to the east and the new Christian one to the west. What came next, believe it or not, was the Armenian Quarter, which to be fair is probably the one that's existence is most surprising. It's important to remember that Armenia was the first ever nation to adopt Christianity as its state religion, back in 301 AD, yet they were always pretty distinct from other Christians. They reject the belief in the nature of Christ being a true God and true man, resolved at the Council of Chalcedon, which Catholics and Eastern Orthodox adhere to. Regardless, Armenian monks still made their way to Jerusalem, for the same reasons as every other Christian, but they settled specifically around Mount Zion in the southwest, which already had a sacred reputation in Christianity, because it was just outside the city's main activity while still being close to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now we have the development of the third religion, Islam. Just like I said for Christianity, all the things we've talked about also play a part in Jerusalem's significance to Islam, because the religion also believes in the validity of the Hebrew Bible. Well, kinda. See, Islam accepts the Torah given to Moses as a true revelation from God, as seen here. But what it doesn't accept is the current Torah in the Hebrew Bible as perfectly preserved. Instead, it's seen as corrupted. Same with the Book of Psalms. There's some overlap between Christianity too, like Jesus and John the Baptist are seen as prophets in Islam, for example. But anyways, Islam originated in the 7th century on the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in the city of Mecca. But given this video is about its relation to Jerusalem, or should I say Al-Quds as it is in Arabic, we're only going to look at its significance to it. It's the third holiest city in Islam, behind Mecca and Medina. According to the Quran, Muhammad, regarded as the last of God's prophets, is said to have flown on the back of a mount called Burak from the Great Mosque of Mecca to Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, where he led other prophets in prayer. Al-Aqsa is the Temple Mount, by the way. From there, he ascended to heaven, met previous prophets, and ultimately stood in the presence of God, all within a single night in 621 CE. It's known as the Isra wal Miraj, or Night Journey in English. Technically, the Quran never mentions Jerusalem by any of its names, but in Surah Al-Isra, verse 1, it's widely interpreted as referring to it here as the farthest mosque. It was only 4 years after Muhammad's death in 632 AD that the first Islamic conquest of Jerusalem began, with the Rashidun Caliphate against the Byzantine Empire. Just a few decades after, the Al-Aqsa compound atop the Temple Mount was complete, which includes the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, among other things. It's the third holiest site in Islam altogether. Lastly, the spiritual importance of Jerusalem is further emphasized due to its status as the first Qibla, or direction of prayer. Islamic tradition holds that Muhammad led prayers towards Jerusalem until the 16th or 17th month after his migration from Mecca to Medina, when God directed him to instead turn towards the Kaaba in Mecca. It's also worth noting that between all these religions, there are massive amounts of overlap in the things which each find holy for different reasons. For example, the Western Wall, which is most holy in Judaism, is still holy in Islam as it's believed to be the site where the Prophet Muhammad tethered Burak before his ascension to heaven. Or the most famous example, and the one that's at the center of much political tension today, is the Temple Mount. While atop it sits the third holiest site in Islam, it itself is actually the holiest one in Judaism, as it's believed to be the spot where the Ark of the Covenant was kept in the first temple, the room known as the Holy of Holies. The rock itself, known as the foundation stone, is the stone in which the world was created from, and the spot in which Abraham almost ended up sacrificing his son in both religions. In Islam specifically, it's where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from. So naturally, just like how Christians began settling around their most holy site, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the same thing happened with Muslims around Al-Aqsa. But the northeast area was specifically chosen due to geography. This is because the land there is flat and elevated, making it safe and easy to build on. It's lined with gates like Herod's Gate and Lion's Gate that connect to trade routes leading north and east, perfect for commerce. Meanwhile, the southeast was topographically unstable. It sits above the Kidron Valley and descends sharply, making it erosion-prone. It was also the lowest and most exposed part of the city's defenses, making it difficult to defend and hard to drain during floods. To make matters worse, the nearby Dung Gate was small and mostly used for local access, not caravans or trade. Naturally, this meant the southeast was inhabited sporadically, and this is where we get to the most complex part of the video. I'm gonna be honest though, there is a lot of history to this. I mean, no city has been written about or fought over as much as Jerusalem. It's been conquered more than 40 times by countless caliphates and empires in history. So we're going to be time jumping quite a bit here. In 1187, Jerusalem was once again captured, this time by the Ayyubid Sultanate of King Saladin. At the time, both people of the Jewish and Muslim faith had been banned from the city under the Crusadim Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Latin Christian state established after the First Crusade in 1099. Saladin permitted them to return though, and Jewish people built small homes near the southern edge of the city, by the Western Wall, which was the closest they could get to the Temple Mount since Al-Aqsa stood atop it already. This marked the beginning of the first recognizable Jewish quarter. Small, impoverished, but stable. Not many people know this, but a few years later, in 1193, Saladin's son established a small Mughrabi quarter in the southeastern corner as well, dedicated to North African immigrants, but more on that later. It was only in the 1340s, under the Mamluk Sultanate, that the Armenians were permitted to build a wall around their quarter because they felt that they didn't pose a threat, thus solidifying its existence. From there, that's kind of how things developed for centuries. Obviously, there wasn't a perfect coexistence, but it was tolerated. Even through the centuries of Ottoman control, while there was a hierarchy in place with Islam at the top and other religions facing heavy taxation, tension, and even extortion, it was still relatively stable and the quarters continued to develop. But they only really became officialized in the mid-1840s, thanks to none other than the British. According to the book 9 Quarters of Jerusalem by Miles Teller, many European powers had thought the Ottoman Empire was about to collapse in the 1830s due to the Egyptian-Ottoman War and there being a change of sultans. As a result of this potential power vacuum, the first British consulate opened in Jerusalem in 1839, before eventually intervening in the war with many other European powers to stop the Ottoman Empire from collapsing, becoming what is known as the Oriental Crisis of 1840. The military intervention left a group of British officers stationed there to survey the terrain: Edward Aldrich and Julian Simmons. The map they produced in 1841 formed the structure of the cartography of the city for decades afterwards. And on this map, we can see the origin of the modern tradition of dividing Jerusalem into 4 quarters. But here's the thing, these 2 officers still may not have been the ones to have actually divided it. Because if you look below the frame of the map, you'll see the text, "The writing added by the Reverend G. Williams and the Reverend Robert Willis." This is where it gets interesting. Let me explain. Reverend Willis, although he's credited, never actually went to Jerusalem. He lived in England as a Cambridge professor. But Reverend George Williams did. He spent 2 years in Jerusalem between 1841 and 1843 as a Protestant chaplain. His stay allowed him to walk the entire city and document it. After returning to England, he spent years compiling his notes into his 1849 memoir, The Holy City: Historical, Topographical, and Antiquarian Notices of Jerusalem, which used Aldrich and Simmons's map. No map had shown this divide before, and every map has shown it since. It was most likely him who created it. A few years later in 1865, Charles William Wilson, an officer in the British Army, was commissioned by the British Ordnance Survey to produce the first scientific mapping of Jerusalem using modern instruments. But when it came to its internal divisions, he simply adopted Williams' 4 quarters layout, effectively normalizing it since most of the world at that time followed Britain's maps. It's only stuck since. To this very day, that quartering system has still persisted, at least on paper. In reality, of course, populations across the city remain mixed in patterns that are neither fixed nor exclusive. It's not like people are constrained by them, but these are what they consist of today. There's the Jewish quarter, which is now about 29 acres and is home to about 2,000 people. It's been the point of intense change, especially when it was expanded over the Mughrabi quarter following the Six-Day War of 1967. The 2 most famous things in it are the Hurva Synagogue and, of course, the Western Wall. Then there's the Armenian quarter, which is 31 acres and home to 2,500 people. It's developed around the 12th century Armenian Cathedral of St. James, which dominates the quarter. The monastery houses the Armenian Apostolic Church's Jerusalem Patriarchate, which is the de facto administrator of the quarter, and acts as a mini welfare state for the approximately 2,000 Armenian residents, though only about 25% of them actually live in the quarter. It's also important to remember that although they're institutionally separate from Orthodox and Catholic Christians, the Armenians consider their quarter to be part of the Christian one. They just have a separate language and culture, really. Speaking of the Christian quarter, it's the second largest of the quarters at 46 acres, and the population varies by source, but is usually between 4,000 to 7,000. Obviously, the main site there is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But there's also the last part of the Via Dolorosa, a street that's a sacred route for Christians, who believed it to be the path Jesus took on his crucifixion, the other half being in the Muslim quarter. Finally, we have just that, the Muslim quarter, the largest and most populated of the 4. It spans about 77 acres and has a population of 22,000 people. Now, if you add up all these acre amounts I just gave you, you'll notice it doesn't quite add up to the 222 acres that is the old city of Jerusalem in total. That's because the Temple Mount isn't included traditionally. Some maps measure to the inner side of the city wall, while others are outer, and just the fact that these boundaries are just conceptually drawn means we're subtracting some acreage. But yes, to most, the Al-Aqsa compound is considered to be the main part of the Muslim quarter, along with the beginning of Via Dolorosa, Church of St. Anne, and right outside it near the Damascus Gate is the Garden Tomb, where many Protestant denominations actually believe Jesus is buried. Today, the 4 quarters remain the simplest way to understand Jerusalem's old city, even if the reality is far more complex. They're relics of empire, faith, and cartography, divisions drawn long ago that still shape how millions see the holiest square kilometer on Earth. Thank you for watching.